kind of what we're talking about today in making a effective dashboard and how important design is. Some of the first things you got to do is make considerations of really why are you making the dashboard at a really, really high level before you start getting into they need this chart and they want timelines for this and they need to see year over year calculations on X metric. You really need to take a big step back and figure out what's this dashboard trying to achieve. Are we just trying to get project updates across? Are we trying to display financial metrics? Are we just trying to make an information portal to make it easy for people to find what they need? You're going to find in another slide here, we talk about answering a single question, and that's really what you're trying to figure out. What's the single question we're trying to answer to make sure this dashboard's providing good value? The next thing to ask is, of that question, what's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? Who do we need to achieve it for? Who's going to be the primary consumer of your dashboard? And find out what's the most important to them. It's not a good idea to make a dashboard for everybody. You want to make a dashboard for a specific audience, and if they need to be broken out into several for different audiences, and that's usually the best way, because different people need different information, and rather than trying to get everything into one dashboard, it's best to split it off and really tailor it to the user who's going to be consuming the data you're trying to give to them. And like the end of that last point said, what is the most important and most useful data for your audience? So again, trying not to clutter it up with everything, because once you start saying we have access to all this information, people often think they want everything. But then when you give them everything, it gets so noisy that they don't really want to look at it anymore, because it gets confusing to look at. So finding out what the highest level key information is going to be the most useful. And we expand on that a little bit further here. So what answers are you trying to provide? The questions people have is going to provide the framework for how you want to build your dashboard. Like I said before, a dashboard that answers a single high-level question is much better served than one that tries to answer several questions incompletely. If you're trying to answer too many, you start to clutter up the dashboard, and you're only half answering a lot of questions, thinking you're providing a lot of value. But usually it's one, maybe 2, 3 questions that the audience has that they're trying to answer. What's the status of this project? Are our sales growing? Who's behind on their tasks? They're usually some really key high-level questions like that. So what are the right KPIs for it too? Once you know the question you're trying to answer, you need to find the minimum amount of data needed to answer it, making sure that you're just giving them exactly what they need rather than, again, everything that they think they need. Part of that too is making sure they have pathways to find it. So if you're answering that high-level question, you want to pave the pathways, link the detail. These 2 last points on this slide are kind of tied together. You want to make sure that people have a way to move through the data. So consider how the widgets and the information is organized to make sure it's easy to understand, and minimizing that work to reach a conclusion. So they shouldn't have to scroll through and drill down and click in to find that answer to that high level question, but they should be able to answer that high level question, and then when they want to navigate deeper to get the context and the details and more into the nitty gritty, they have pathways to do that. Dashboards are just meant to be a really high level overview. We want to give the people the ability to dive deeper and find those specifics. So if you're at some of those previous sessions, what I often like to do in dashboards, when you want to have a Smartsheet report on a dashboard, I often like to make almost 2 reports or have the report linked to the sheet. So using the example of project management, like in a RAID log, a risk, action, issue, decision log, you might just want to give really high level, what's the project, who's the project manager, what's the risk, and the description, or a risk rating or something. And if there's a lot more details, you can make it so that you click on that widget and it takes you to a more expanded view where they can get, when was this risk raised? Who are the stakeholders we need to consult on this? Who's assigned to this risk and owning it? What's the mitigation strategy? You can give them that detail when they click, but at a high level, they probably just want to know what's the risk so that they can figure out themselves if they need to follow up on it or not. If you give them all the details up front, they might think, oh, I already saw this risk. I don't need to know any more about it. Or if you're just giving them the high level, it might catch their eye a little sooner. But giving them the ability and the pathways to find the information they need if they need to dive deeper, but don't assume that they need that deep dive right at the surface level. Sometimes that comes down to making multiple dashboards in Smartsheet, but it can be much more effective for the audience. Some common dashboard challenges, things I run into myself still, that I just try and keep in the back of my head. And again, you kind of always have to take a step back to make sure that you're achieving the core goal or answering that single or two questions that you're trying to answer with the dashboard. Misleading information. And I have some good examples of this from some other dashboards I've found images of that I think are really useful. Ensuring the data that you're throwing up on your dashboard has the context and relevance to avoid confusing or misleading the audience. It's pretty easy. You've probably seen charts like this online that are really misleading. 100% of people who've consumed H2O have been sick in their life or something like that. It's pretty easy to mislead data, and sometimes you can do it by accident, and whether that's a matter of putting what's on the left that should be on the right, or making your pie chart fill up from the left to the right and giving the wrong message with what you're trying to display. So just making sure the data you have has that context too. So if you're providing a status update, making sure it's actually tied to a project and not tied to a whole program or suite of projects or a portfolio, making sure that you have those minimum data points to still give that context and make sure it's all relevant. Expectations versus actuals. Really easy to start muddying the waters when you're trying to map out projections versus what's reality. So paying close attention to things like colors. Like I often for projections might use a gray, or if it's year over year, I'll use a gray for the previous year on a line chart. And then only use the fill option in Smartsheet that we looked at 2 weeks ago in our last session. Using the fill option only for the actuals, and then just that gray target or year over year from past year in the background, and actually putting them in order in your metric sheet or your report you're pulling from for your widget will actually change how those lines on a line chart overlap. So you want to make sure you have the reality in the front versus projected in the back, so you're overlaying the reality over your projected. And again, keeping context in mind with that. Is it a projection? Is it year over year? How do I know? Is it in the legend? Is it in the title? Just things to consider there. Clutter. I am a victim of this and a perpetrator of this. Like I said earlier, usually when you get into requirements with your C-suite or your executives or senior leadership that you're trying to build this dashboard for, to give them the info they need, you start telling them you have access to all this data, and they start to say, I want all of it. But you need to kind of manage their expectations and make sure you know what they actually need, because it's easy to start filling these dashboards up with clutter. If you're giving too much, you're just going to demotivate people from even looking, because they can't find it, and they've probably been finding the data an easier way before, or a way that they're used to, and they're not willing to make the change to figure out how to navigate your dashboard. Clutter is a big one, especially when you start to get into making multiple reports, and you want to have, for every site, you want to have a dash or a widget for every single site on your dashboard, and you're trying to fit it all in so you don't have to scroll through the dashboard. Take a step back. Maybe there's a different way to approach it. Maybe instead of each site having a widget, you need to have them all mapped onto one bigger widget, one bigger bar chart or column chart or in a pie chart, something like that. I got some design tips here too, and I think I've probably kept alluding to these as I went through the other slides here, but keep it straightforward. Really just try not to overcomplicate it. A simple presentation of the data is often the most powerful. I keep saying clutter and muddying the waters. It's even the next point here. But answering that single question is usually going to give the most benefit, and then just giving those pathways for them to find the more in the weeds data that they might be looking for after they have the answer to that first question. Anything outside that key data is really just an accessory and can distract from the main point. I like that the word accessory in there, because it really is a lot of the time that those additional widgets that folks might ask for when you're going through requirements of developing a dashboard. They might think they want it, but it's really just an accessory that's nice to have and isn't actually answering that question and is distracting from answering it. This isn't a rule, but it's a general guideline that visuals are often more powerful than giving the data. You give them those pathways to get to the data is the better way to do it. But if you can give them a visual so that they have that high level overview, it's often more powerful presentation. So pay attention to your use of space, colors. So, using those high contrast colors versus kind of staying within a color scheme, depending on your use case, can be different. Pass fail is obviously different than not started, in progress, complete. Might be more of a spectrum. Pass fail might be a more of a black and white kind of color scheme. And if you only focus on the numbers and you're just giving charts and data and spreadsheets, you might lose people's attention, make it harder for them to take away that key message when they have to comb through columns and figure out how to interpret the data they're looking at. Give them the visuals first and give them the pathway to find the key data in a more concise view, whether that's going from a chart to a report, and then a report could link to the actual source sheet where they could find everything. It might be better than trying to give them that report on the dashboard. Focus on the user experience. So testing definitely comes into play here. Getting ongoing stakeholder feedback there, making sure that they're finding it easy to use, not confusing, and really just yourself trying to come from their perspective of is this easy to navigate. Sometimes if you're like me and you end up putting your head down and making these dashboards yourself, trying to meet every requirement and gather all the data in there, you think it's easy to navigate because you built it, so you know what happens when you click on everything, but it should be intuitive. Sometimes getting someone to test your dashboard who has zero context is actually the best way to do it. And if they don't realize that you can click on this, maybe you need to make some sort of visual indicator that things are clickable, or a little help tip somewhere that says click on a widget to see what it does. You want to make sure it's intuitive. And something I think a lot of people overlook is developing an evaluation and a maintenance strategy. Things change often, fast, sometimes too much. So you got to kind of have a periodic time to review your dashboard, making sure it's still providing the value, people are still using it. You can always check activity logs on your dashboards to see if people are clicking on it. If you have access to the admin panel, you might have some more visibility on that, but every sheet has a activity log where you can see people viewing the sheet and clicking on things. So take a peek there. And make sure that the data is relevant. That's a big one. Making sure your data is relevant. Are we still measuring metrics the same way? Do those need to be updated or revised? Are the charts still providing value? Do we need to change the color schemes to make it more intuitive? You really have to, again, I'm going to keep saying take a step back, but you have to take a step back because you get so married to things when you've made them and you've been maintaining them for a while and you're proud of it, but things change. So you want to make sure that it's still relevant for your audience and answering that key question or two. Next, I have some nice clean samples. Like some of these are pretty simple, but just wanted to show you some different examples of the different approaches to dashboards. So this is kind of acting as an information portal with just a little bit of visuals here. This is some generic data, but you can see you have some high-level visuals for projects per strategic initiative. So maybe you have increased sales, decreased cost, increased customer count, things like that, where you can get those high-level questions answered. How many projects do we have in initiative 1? Really easy question to answer. You have 2. If they need to dive deeper, you can start to give them links in here. So this is really acting as an information portal. And I've actually started to try and minimize using titles too much on dashboards. because there is always the title at the top of a dashboard right here. So unless you need to be able to export this dashboard or print it to PDF, or you're using it in mobile, you might not actually need to have your dashboard's title as a title widget. Sometimes it can look nicer depending on how you're laying it out, but try and take an approach of less is more a lot of the time. Take away the blocks around the title widgets, take away logos and things like that, because you often have your branding up at the top in Smartsheet if you have that enterprise plan. So you're just kind of spamming the audience with the logo, where we all work, we see the logo all the time. Unless it's an external facing dashboard, of course, you might want to boost that logo recognition too. But this is a nice example of kind of a hybrid of an information portal, giving you lots of links to all the other supplementary tools you might need to use to get the information, but with some high-level visuals to answer a couple questions. How many tasks do we have outstanding? Okay, let's go look at the task report we have linked off to the side. Get some more details. Another one here. This is nice. I like to. You kind of have to keep mind of the old newspaper approach of keeping key information above the fold. So before you ever have to scroll or change your zoom on your screen, you should be able to get those high-level questions answered right off the start, as soon as the dashboard's open, without getting any more deeper into the dashboard. So nice big visuals. Nice clean colors with some contrast here. All of these are very different categories, so the colors all contrast with each other, where these colors, the request by assigned person, they're all the same color because it's all counting the same metric here. We just want to know how many requests are assigned to each of these people. And then by status, this one I'd actually have feedback to kind of follow a color gradient or something, maybe like a gray, light green, dark green, or something like that, because it's all kind of leading up to an end goal of being closed. So I like to often start with gray and then a kind of a faded color and a solid color for those kind of progress donut charts like this. And then you're getting a little bit more detail as you keep scrolling. So kind of that's one of the theory things of making dashboards, is keeping it big, nice, presentable information up top, a little more detailed as you scroll down, and even more detailed if you need to scroll further. So it kind of cascades into more detail as you go through a dashboard. And this one, for the folks that are very, very data based, because there are times where you do need to just give them the data. Folks in more financial focused positions or leadership positions in finance or accounting, they might need to see things in their language too. So this is all part of what's important of talking to your audience and understanding how they like to interact with data and the questions that they need answered. So still up front, right at the very top, you're seeing cycle data month over month. This looks like an ongoing revenue tracking kind of dashboard. So you can see where are we growing, where are we lagging, things like that right up front. And then again, answering the high level details right as soon as you open up the dashboard, you get the answers, and then as you keep scrolling, you get a little bit more detail. And when I talk about scrolling further through a dashboard to get to more detail, we also want to avoid the infinite scroll feeling that some dashboards have, where you just keep going and going, and there's more and more. If you're starting to feel long, and it almost feels like you have to scroll more than 2, even 3 is starting to stretch it, 3 kind of page lengths of scrolling, it might be better served that you need to break it into multiple dashboards. And like last session, where we kind of turned those images at the top into buttons to navigate between different dashboards, might be something that you want to consider as breaking it up, because it's also likely that the different levels of detail have a different audience. So someone who's a manager as opposed to a senior leader, they might need that middle level of detail instead of just the high level kind of portfolio wide level of detail. So breaking it into different dashboards might actually help you serve more audiences more effectively too. Some of these are outside of Smartsheet too, but I just wanted to show you some more design ideas that are really powerful. You can see that often we have a tendency that when you're trying to answer that big question, you want to make those visuals big up at the top and then get the detail to be a bit smaller. This kind of takes a different approach where we're actually using the same widgets, the same size throughout the dashboard, but just breaking it up with some simple lines and making sure you provide a legend can show that this is kind of the overall summary at the top, and then breaking it down by each category here as you scroll through. And then organizing the data too, so that your biggest is at the top, your smallest is at the bottom, gives a really nice visual appeal to this. I have a tendency to do this exact thing where I want to make the summary one nice and big, and then make all the detailed ones smaller. But this approach, making them all the same size, I think is really effective, and just with the breaking it up with simple lines and a title has made it nice and interpretable. This ties into misleading data. This obviously isn't a Smartsheet dashboard. This is a pretty sophisticated one somebody made, but it's the exact same data that just presented differently can really give you a very different message. So you can see that with the red color and it coming down from the top obviously ties into what the title is saying there, where flip it to blue, nice calm colors, lay out the data a little bit differently, and it paints a completely different message. So when I brought up misleading data and taking note of the colors choices you're using and kind of the images we're looking at, it can really actually, it doesn't even look like this dashboard changed. It looks like they just rotated it completely, and just flipping it over and turning it blue completely changed the message that's coming across.